All right, my good friends, this is Mr. Davis. This is Sunday night. This is a ed puzzle that I'm going to make for you guys about Unit 3. Um, so this is land-based empires. You have um, a Unit 3 outline that I gave you. And told you to review Unit 3's outline before you wrote your DBQ on land-based empires, or you could have chosen to do the Mongols, which would have been about Unit 3. But we did this as we finished Unit 6, right before we knew exactly what was going to be on the AP exam, but now we know it's a DBQ, so we can focus on those skills. But I do want us to know about the content, because content is going to help you have a strong thesis statement. It's going to give you pieces of outside evidence, and it's also going to help you hip documents. So knowing content is still important at this point. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to just pause it here, and I'm going to have you, what I want you to do here is to read. So this is, I'll include this link here. This is chapter 15. This is a regular AP book, not a AP textbook. But this reading gives you a lot of points. This puts it into context. So what was going on in the world? Well, this time period starts in 1450. So it's very interesting, because what else starts in 1450? 1453, the Ottomans, led by Mehmed II, lay siege to Constantinople. So let's just take a look here. I'll let you read here in a second, but just going down to here. Constantinople is right here. Today it is Istanbul. So Constantinople is here. It was named after the Emperor Constantine, and it was the eastern half of the Roman Empire, and that is why it is so important. The Ottomans were Turks. Turks were living here in this what is today Turkey. So they're not Arabic. The Arabs would be from down here in Arabia. They're a little bit more light skin, a little kind of like European looking than maybe a Middle Easterner. So the Ottomans were Turks, but eventually they do rule over Arabs. They rule over Africans, and they're going to rule over other Middle Eastern people. But they're Turkish. And what they wanted to do is take down Constantinople, because it was still the site of the capital of the Holy Roman Empire, or in the Byzantine Empire, the eastern half of the Holy Roman Empire, I should say. So it was a symbolic siege to take down Constantinople. It had fallen into hard times. If you remember, we talked extensively actually about the siege of Constantinople in 1453. And these kingdoms here are known as gunpowder empires, as you remember. And one of the things they talked about is Mehmed the Conqueror was using this stinking cannon that was so big. I think they called it the Constantine gun. And the reason why he's successful and the Byzantines were not is because they could afford the Constantine gun and the Byzantines could not. So this is where Constantinople. The Ottomans were beasts. At the end of their empire, they're called the sick man of Europe. But at the height, like 1453 to like the 1700s, they are in beast mode. This is great information from Unit 3. They get all the way up into Austria, up into close to Vienna, 1529, 1683. This set off alarm bells in Europe, because they were Muslim. They are Sunni Muslims, are the Ottomans. And they are infiltrating all the way up to, this is like Central Europe right here. This is right smack in the heart of Europe. Now, this is 1453, as I keep saying, to give you context of what's going on in the world. The Crusades are over. So we don't really even talk about the Crusades in this class very much, because they happened before 1200 for the most part. But the Ottomans had picked up the flag of Islam and are taking care of business. This is Jerusalem. This is Mecca and Medina. This is another piece of outside information. You could say the Ottomans were known as the Sword of Islam, because they protected Jerusalem, they protected Medina, and they protected Mecca. So they were the sword of Islam, and they were going way up into Europe. Now the Europeans do mount an defensive, and they end up pushing them back. But there is it would not surprise me at all if you see some type of source about Europeans talking about how impressive the Ottomans were. The Ottomans were sort of like the Chinese, and you might have picked up on that in some of your source readings for your DBQ, that you worked your way up in the Ottoman Empire by your merits. Just like the Chinese, you worked up the way in government by taking a civil service exam. So the Ottomans were very impressive. They were militaristic, and they used religion to legitimize their rule. Their term they use is the Sultan, and they were very much, there's a marriage between church and state in the Ottoman Empire. But they have expanded, and they're gonna take over this whole like kind of really crazy outline of the Ottoman Empire. Where Persia is right here, this is the Safavids, which we'll read about today. And then outside of this picture over here is the Mughals. This would be right where India is. And the Mughals were where Hindus were ruled by Muslims. All right, so let's go up here and let's read about the Ottomans here. It starts on page 484. So let's go from 484 489, so about 5 pages. So take about 7 minutes or so, and just read about the Ottomans here. Okay, we are back here. So hopefully you got a lot in there about the Ottomans in a quick amount of time. And again, the reason why I like to use this text is because it's a little bit quicker of a read. So you learned a lot about the Ottomans there. Wouldn't surprise me if there's something related to the Ottomans here. On a DBQ question. So 1453, they take down Constantinople, create this big empire. We saw kind of the rise of the Ottomans, the Janissaries. They were the Christian boys that were recruited and then turned Muslim. But one of the problems you'll see with big empires is they almost get too big for their own good sometimes, and they get so spread out so thin that corruption often occurs on the outskirts, away from the what you would say like the capital of the empire. So, but the Ottomans do get into Central Europe, then they get pushed back, and eventually, when we come back into the Industrial Revolution age, the Ottomans are really falling apart. But some really good things in here about the Ottomans. So hopefully you picked up on that. Some phrases you can use. Gunpowder Empire is what they're known for. That just shows you the technology they incorporated from the Chinese. The sword of Islam. I'm losing my train of thought here, but the use of the word Sultan. We also we talked about this, and this was it was interesting about the Ottomans is that after they chose who the Sultan was going to be, they immediately executed all of their brothers. If you remember that from class, and it's like the worst job ever would be to be the brother of a Sultan, because you were going to get executed, because they didn't want any coups going on, or brothers trying to take out one another to get to be next in line for the throne. Here's a good reading here about Suleiman the Magnificent. It's a pretty sweet lid right here. Pretty awesome stuff. Another thing, they talk about building mosques here. In Islam, their architecture is going to be based on they do art through architecture, so to speak. They don't. It says Islam forbids the depiction of human figures because of the belief that it might encourage adultery. Thus, geometric designs of decorative painted tiles in the top Topkapi Palace here. So you see that like the Taj Mahal was a mix of Hindu and Islamic art, and you see that like their architecture is their art. And in the Ottoman Empire, they had a lot of domes. We talked about the one ruler that had 81 uh, mosques built, and they all had a dome on top of it. So a lot of information about the Ottomans there. So that's kind of a more in-depth read. This PowerPoint will talk a little bit, kind of to give you like the Cliff Notes version of the Ottoman Empire here. Now we're going to move on. Let's move on to the Safavid Empire here. And the Safavids are next door neighbor. They are Shias. So there's a good map of the Ottoman Empire prior to the siege of Constantinople. Just before we get this off, as we saw this, we've already seen this picture before. This was the siege of Constantinople, and the Constantine gun talks about when the Hagia Sophia fell, and when the Muslims got in there and they saw what happened to the Hagia Sophia, how devastated. They said, I can't believe like what we have done for that, the marvel that we just destroyed here. There is Mehmed II, Mehmed the Conqueror here. So let's move to their next door neighbors. These guys were Shia Muslims, and so religion legitimizing their rule. And the Ottomans were Sunnis. The Shias, their next door neighbors, are Shiites, and they don't like each other. So it takes some time. So we don't talk about the Safavids too often, but there was a source about the Safavids. So just a few pages here. So about 5-minute read here from 492 to 495, I believe. So just take some time to read that about the Safavids. All right, we are going to pick up with the Safavids, and let me bring this up here. So the Safavids are the next door neighbors to the Ottomans. So on this map here, the Ottomans are in yellow, and Persia is the Safavid Empire. This is an empire that is kind of created by this guy that we didn't talk about too much. Went kind of fast during the Mongols and the descendants of the Mongols, but there was a beast named Tamerlane or Timur. There's a really good Wikipedia few paragraphs about Timur right here. Tamerlane. He was not a Genghis Khan descendant, but he believed himself is like an equal to Genghis Khan. He was a few years after Genghis Khan. He reigned from 1370 to 1405 as Timur, and he's also known as Tamerlane. And he was an undefeated military ruler. Like they say, he never lost any battles. And he was, at the time of his death, he was trying to bring the whole Mongol Empire back. But it does not happen. He doesn't get the Mongols united, doesn't get all conquered areas together. But in this territory that he conquered, this huge territory, it's today sometimes referred to as Persia. It is where Iraq and Iran are today in this Persian plateau. But here, let's read about the Safavid Empire here. So you saw, we don't talk about them as much. They use the title Shah. So if you see like a sultan talking to a Shah or writing a letter to a Shah, which we have seen, and they hate each other. The Sultan will hate the Shah, and the Shah will hate the Sultan because they're different forms of Islam. Some of their culture that they institute. They talk about the veils and that they wore in the Safavid Empire. But one of the big cultural takeaways is the fact that they create the Persian rugs that get traded vastly throughout the region. This is also a gunpowder region. They have kind of the sandwich kind of not great location as far as you got the Ottomans over here, you got the Mughals over here. So not a great location to be having to fight maybe battles on other fronts. But so we just don't talk about it as much, and they're not quite as big as the Ottoman Empire. And so do yourself a favor, read about the Safavids there. Here's a little bit of a comparison here on page. I guess this would be like 494, probably 493. Um, and this is just their rulers will kind of do the same thing. They'll use religion to legitimize their rule. Now, in an Islamic empire, like the ruler is going to be the highest, pretty much the highest religious figure in the state. And in some ways, you can make an argument that that kind of, wouldn't say necessarily it's a backwards thing to do, but you'll see in other countries where maybe they let religion just people privately practice the religion they want to practice, and the government focuses on running the country like in a non-religious way. Sometimes that makes society run a little bit more smoothly, like separation of church and state. That clearly does not happen here in the Ottoman and the Safavid empires. Mughal Empire is going to be a little bit interesting because it's going to be so many Hindus are ruled by such a small percentage of Muslims. So let's move on to the Mughal Empire, and this is in India today. So this goes on to talk about Persian rugs and trading. Trading has always been a big part of Islam because Muhammad was a merchant, and also this is not tons of great farmland out here, so you have a lot of people going back and forth trading goods from more fertile areas. So some really good sources here. So let's read. Let's finish off the gunpowder empires with reading about the Mughals here. This is on 498, so take a few minutes here and read to 503. Okay, so the last group we're going to look at are the Mughals. So the Mughals here, spelled differently for the most part. In the books we've read, it's Mughal. They call it Mogul. But the Mughal dynasty was started by Babur. But we really know the Mughals after Akbar. So we remember Akbar the Great. And these three religions we looked at today, all forms of Islam. But they were Sunni Islam, and they ruled over a majority of Hindus. Now, Akbar the Great, we talked about in class, Akbar the Great, why was he great? Is because he let kind of people be who they were. So he knew that it probably wasn't in his best favor to come in and, make these Hindus convert to Islam. Was not something that they were going to do for the most part. There was also a tax on non-Muslims in the empire that he got rid of. It was called the jizya, and Akbar the Great got rid of it, or he relaxed it a little bit. He even let Hindus do some practices that really strict Muslims would not be happy to see people living in one of their empires doing certain things. But Akbar the Great was great because he kind of let people do what they wanted. Now, there was his grandson, I believe it was Aurangzeb, and we said Aurangzeb went from A to Z, where Akbar was great, let people do what they wanted. Aurangzeb was not great, and what he wanted to do was make it a strict Islamic state. So says the victorious son Aurangzeb had his brother put to death and imprisoned his father. Aurangzeb then had himself crowned emperor in 1658. Aurangzeb is one of the most controversial rulers in the history of India. During his reign, the empire reached its greatest physical size. Constant warfare and religious intolerance, right here, however, made his subjects resentful. As a man of high principle, Aurangzeb attempts to eliminate many of what he considered to be India's social evils. He forbade the Hindu custom of suti, which is cremating a widow on her husband's funeral pyre. It's a pretty crazy practice that they had. Literally, women would be put to death after their husband died, and he got rid of that. Um, he tried to forbid gambling and drinking as well. He was a devout Muslim and adopted another of measures to reverse the Mughal policies of religious tolerance. So the long story short, the lasting impact, the big takeaway about Aurangzeb is that it's going to leave the door wide open for the British to come in. Because this is kind of going to be a distracted, major, huge empire. And the British are going to come in. Now, the first, so this is a little bit later in the kind of the age of exploration um, and the age of imperialism, but the they'll be called East India companies. The British East India Company will come down here. They're really going to exploit India. And this is pretty recently. We talked about like how the Sepoy revolts, where the British were tricking the Sepoy Indians to be licking bullet cartridges that were laced with, I think it was pork fat. So there was kind of all hell broke loose at one point during the British East India Company, and Queen Victoria got tired of like capitalists just running amok down in India, and she takes over India, and it officially becomes part of the British imperial British Empire. And so that's kind of going to be the lasting takeaway. And I know I kind of went fast through that because it's not really what we're talking about yet. But what we're talking about is religious intoleration is going to lead a distracted empire, leave the door open for the British to come in and exploit them. So this would be a good read here. I'll just do it for us here. The British East India Company faced challenges in its efforts to gain control of Indian trade. By the mid-1700s, the power of the French East India Company rivaled that of the British. In southern India, the French and the British fought a series of wars in the regions near Chennai. 1751, Robert Clive won an important victory for the British East India Company against the French and Indian allies. In the north, Clive defeated a Mughal-led army at the Battle of Plassey near Fort William in Bengal in 1757. The balance of power shifted towards the British. After defeating the French and the Mughals, British became the dominant in India after World War II. For much of that time, the British East India Company had sovereign powers of a government and ruling much of India. So we saw a different picture of Robert Clive meeting with an Indian ruler on an elephant, and this is here they're just putting their flag in and saying we're here, and we're planting our flag means we're not going anywhere. We're here to stay. And so those are the Gunpowder Empire. So you can do this and read Unit 3. The other countries we need to talk about are China and Russia. We will just barely touch on the other European countries in Unit 3 because they really come to the scene in Unit 4. So we did these three Muslim empires. We'll talk about China and Russia, and then we'll be pretty close to moving on to reviewing for Unit 4. So I will leave some of my tips on our DBQs, but I was really happy with what I'm seeing. And I'm really happy that I see some people using the thesis formula and the context formula, because that's a way to really set your paper up to get the maximum points if you follow some of these simple tricks. So please keep watching these videos and using this. And if you do get bored, I'll put some other things to really get done with you get used to the time crunch. So I will stop here, and you guys take care.